Hi everyone, my name is Franco Varona, a partner at Vintage Grail, one of Asia's leading watch specialists. Welcome to the inaugural episode of In Conversation, a show where we will speak to some of the world's leading watch experts to find out what makes them tick, if you will. 2021, as we all know, was a banner year for watch auctions, with multiple records being broken. Of course, a large part of that was Aurel Bacs, senior consultant at Phillips, who has been an integral part in many of the auctions and the watches that were presented at these auctions. Today, we will sit down with him and learn a little bit more about which watches he started with, how his passion for collecting began, and finally, what we can expect in this year's Geneva 15 and Royal Oak 50th auctions. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. First of all, Aurel, thank you very much for taking the time to meet with us today. It's very much a privilege and an honor to speak with you. Perhaps we can start with actually just your own watch journey. I mean, tell us a little bit about how you began and your interest in collecting watches.
I grew up in Zurich. My dad has been a fan, a collector of anything vintage and mechanical. Mm-hmm. So as he could not satisfy his appetite for mechanical watches during the quartz decade, let's say the 70s, he turned to vintage. And as a young boy, I was maybe not even 10 years old, I noticed my dad would start going to pawnbrokers, watchmakers who eventually struggled to sell old mechanical watches, as everybody wanted the ultra-thin electric or electronic watches. And normally the eldest son goes on a Saturday afternoon with his dad. And this is how I sort of discovered watches. Then at one point I realized that there is a community. My dad welcomed occasionally other collectors, fellow watch collectors at home, maybe after dinner for a drink. Yeah. And I observed how they would also make each other offers and say, oh, I like that Zenith. Would you part with that for 120 francs? Example. And I remembered my dad had just bought that on Saturday for 90 francs from a defunct watch retailer.
Right.
I was like, wait a second. So I broke my piggy bank and said, Daddy, I want to buy watches too. Okay. So actually the very first experience in mechanical and vintage watches was really to boost my allowance, my pocket money that would suddenly allow me to, I wouldn't say compete, but to at least be at the level of some friends who had here a franc or 2 francs for a chocolate after school, something that wasn't in my budget for sure. And then from there it was just a discovery, a journey.
Right.
Then I remember in the 80s there were the first watch fair for collectors. I was a teenager, and this is how it just gradually became what it is today.
Really? And what would you say is that one moment where you really bought into the passion of watch collecting? I mean, that one watch, or that one, walking into a shop or seeing it in a fair. What is that moment?
So my first mechanical watches that I acquired on my own were Certina, Doxa, maybe Eterna, and yes, these were brands, but definitely not maybe an Oris. Mm-hmm. These were not the haute horlogerie. These were watches maybe at 10, 20, 30 francs back then on a flea market. But I think there was an Omega Seamaster from the 50s. I think it was an early generation that still had the bumper automatic movement. And I remember it was very neglected when I picked it up in a flea market. What I did realize is that it was dirty and neglected, but somehow the substance and the originality was there. And I did have, with my dad, we had a trusted watchmaker, and I brought that sort of rather like literally, can you do something with this? And I'm not saying there were pieces in my hand, but
sure,
it wasn't like a trophy looking watch.
Right.
And he said, yeah, let me see what I can do. And a week later, I went back to him and he said, look, I have the original plexi with the omega symbol in the center. And I gave it a good clean in the ultrasonic soap solution.
Right.
The watch was night and day. And it was really sort of like Phoenix from the ashes without a costly intervention. And I was really in love with that watch. And I think sometimes of it. It's with these large lugs, with this very masculine proportions without being too big, too oversized. And that was, I think, a wow experience.
Right.
Sort of like you have to look twice before you either approve or dismiss a watch. So it was gradual. I can't really say there was one particular event, but these were the small events that, like brickstones, added up to fortify my passion.
Sure. And there's something about vintage watches specifically, as you were saying, where it retains its original state, at least, or at least it's just clean, let's say. That is a little bit different than replacing pieces.
This is obviously a discussion that we can take for hours together.
Right.
I am sometimes criticized for being too much of a purist. And then sometimes I criticize those who are more saint than a saint.
Right.
A watch, of course, has to be original. But where does originality start and where does it end? In my view, it is absolutely appropriate to change a crystal as long as it is fitting the right size, the right dimension, the right, the original components.
Right.
And potentially the same for winders, pushers, seals, also screws. Don't forget, a screw is not a numbered item. So there are interventions that were absolutely intended and meant by the watchmakers and the companies who make these watches. Of course, what is not correct is to switch across decades components.
Sure.
Worse is if you go even outside of the brand.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't try and be beyond saint.
Yeah.
There, I think we're sometimes, as a community, exaggerating.
As long as it's not a Franken watch or a Frankenstein watch, I guess.
Correct.
To say at least. So actually, I represent a very rapidly emerging market, right? I come from the Philippines and I'm from Southeast Asia. There, what we'll see is a lot of new collectors, people that are really trying to break into the market. In your opinion, what is the best way to start a collection, right? Is it really to save up for that Grail watch right away? Or is it to be opportunistic and find some good pieces and just kind of build your way into your Grail watch, let's say?
I think there are several correct is already too much of a self-assuming comment.
Sure.
There are several intelligent ways to approach it.
Okay.
By intelligent, I mean the most important thing to consider is that you're not in for a week or a month, hopefully not even for a year, but that it's a long journey. I know collectors who have literally made it a life-filling hobby from 20 to 80.
Right.
In order to have that satisfaction, and satisfaction can be of so many different levels or forms or shapes, it can be intellectual, it can be emotional, it can be economical.
Right.
My best advice is to first do your homework. I think just deciding at one moment, now I'm a watch collector, and then leave the house with a credit card in your pocket and go and buy whatever you can get your hands on is like meeting someone in the morning and go and get married in the afternoon.
No planning.
Probably a bit risky. So no one can overnight become a scholar. Nobody can overnight become a specialist on pricing. Do your homework and take it easy. Take it slowly and learn. You can learn in a large variety of ways. There is, of course, literature. When I was starting, literally, a good library was composed of 20 books.
Right.
Today, it is infinite, the amount of information that is available, also online, of course.
Right.
There are blogs, there are specialized blogs that focus only on a particular brand or even on a model, specific model on a brand, and learn. Engage with the community is my advice. The community is composed of fellow collectors, collectors who have become dealers, dealers who have become auction house specialists, museum curators. The community is huge, and my experience has always been that new members are warmly welcomed. You can reach out to those that you see in the press, museum directors. You feel you shouldn't even bother them with your beginner question.
Sure.
On the contrary, they love it. They love helping the next generation of collectors, explaining a model, a certain caliber, a certain reference. And that is, I think, a very precious experience, helping you to navigate in what seems maybe first intimidating in the jungle.
Yeah.
Then listen to your heart. And what I mean with that is, don't collect what is popular on Instagram, where you think you get the most likes or thumbs up. Do listen to your heart, whether you like steel or black dial or Roman numerals or large diameters or small diameters. Be yourself, be authentic. Now, if you like Royal Oak and Nautilus, two of the most celebrated and popular watches, that's okay. But don't go after them because your idol football player or a famous singer wears it and you think it makes you become as cool as them. Because once you buy a watch in a perfect world, you want to enjoy it for years and years and maybe decades to come. So once you have the knowledge, once you have decided what your heart desires, the aesthetic, the comfort on your wrist, then I believe it's important to look at the financials, a budget. I don't think a watch collector will be happy if they have $10,000, and that's their annual budget for watches, to go and spend it on the first watch, the $10,000. It's quite frustrating once you're, the waterline is here and you're just trying to breathe and survive.
Right.
I've done that when I was a kid, selling my entire watch collection for one watch. And I was so proud on one hand, but so desperate on the other hand, that I was completely paralyzed afterwards. Right. I couldn't go after this Omega or that WC. So a good, sustainable financial planning is definitely good. And for example, if you go to an auction, also find out from the specialists what is it likely going to fetch. Great. So that you know what's ahead of you.
Great.
Find out what are the commissions or the taxes to pay, so there's no unexpected, unpleasant surprise later. So do define, this is what it's worth to me. Do the math, how far you can bid, so that you land there and there's no suddenly extra 1,000 or 2,000 missing when you get the bill. Right. Now, buying and selling is part of a collector's life. We evolve in our taste, whether it's the way we dress, the food, maybe we move one day, homes. But I don't think a collector is somebody who's buying, selling 3 times a week. That's dealing.
Yeah, that's
and
trading.
I leave dealing to the dealers. Like a doctor should be a doctor. I shouldn't heal myself, that's why I go to the doctor. And it's often not financially interesting to a collector to swing too fast forward and backward. There's maybe transaction fees, whether that the dealer or the auction house has a commission for brokering a transaction. So the more long-term you plan, the more easy and steady you float and cruise on that journey. So once that you are in that community, everything becomes very easy. You know who are the good guys, who are the trustworthy guys, who are the scholars, the recognized specialists, where to call if you need archival information from a brand. You know what things are worth, and suddenly you are standing on your own feet.
Right.
But until then, my best advice is find your trusted partners by reputation, by introduction, from friends, because nobody can know everything. And the market has become so complex that thankfully we at Phillips here have 35 team members and 20-some specialists. I need to go to some colleagues who know more about Speedmasters, who know more about Daytonas, who know more about certain independents. It's not, one shouldn't be ashamed to ask questions to those who know. They're always happy to help, because it's in everybody's interest that you're enjoying this journey.
That's true. It's like collecting is like there's some humility in collecting as well. I mean, to your point, I think it's really interesting to note that basically what you've said is when one starts a collecting journey, it's really about personal, connections. It's personal connections with your advisors, personal connections with your watch, and personal connections to trust, the opinions of others, actually.
The most beautiful part, I think, besides wearing a watch, the hunt, the research, maybe the battle in an auction room to win it, is the social aspect. I warmly recommend anyone, the viewers here today, go to get-togethers, attend club meetings, go to auction previews. We're hosting an auction here in Geneva this coming weekend, and there are lots and lots of collectors who breakfast, lunch, dinner, hang out together, and they welcome the most experienced collectors, the John Goldbergers, the Jason Singers. They are here and they say, "Hey Franco, nice to meet you. Come with me for dinner." And suddenly you're deeply involved in discussions with the world's leading specialists, and they come for the watches, they stay often for the friendships.
And I think that's what's nice. It's a small community right now, so it is accessible in many ways, more than other communities.
If I may, it used to be small-ish.
Okay.
I think a good auction in the 1990s that I hosted as a 20-some-year-old young specialist, there were 50 people in the room.
Right.
There was no online.
Okay.
Today, a nice, solid Phillips auction gathers 3,000+ collectors, and we think there's hundreds of thousands of watch collectors out there. So that very intimate, small insider group has grown into I would say nearly a worldwide movement. However, literally you can parachute a collector anywhere in the world and he's lost completely. Where am I? He takes his phone and says, "Hey guys, anywhere in this town, a watch collector buddy, I'm lost." There's always somebody who says, "Yeah, come to my house. I'll help you." It's an incredible group of people.
Fantastic. And of course, that's what we're trying to do as well with Vintage Grail, is really to try to grow that in our little small part of the world and grow the interest towards auctions like Phillips as well. Now, for early collectors, beginning collectors, I'm going to ask a big question here. What are the pieces that you think that they should look at or focus on or at least study to start their collection?
I have seen, of course, young novice collectors where I thought, oh, poor young man, I might have to help him with a watch in the low thousands. I didn't know that he was one of the most successful .com entrepreneurs and his first watch was going to be a Patek Philippe minute repeater. I've seen it in the last few years, so certainly it depends on the budget. There's absolutely nothing wrong if you have the means and the passion and the knowledge to go all the way to the top with your first acquisition, if the set of parameters is right. Humbleness is always a good advisor, and ask questions. Now, there are, of course, incredible bargains to be had today. When I say bargain, I know we're still talking real money in the 4, 5, 6 digit US dollar amounts. But many new entrants think you have to be on the Forbes list to even stand a chance in this world. Right. And that is wrong. We can think of original 1970s Hoyers, Zeniths, Omegas, IWCs, stainless steel, time only or chronographs for as little as $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 US. Watches that, seriously, I think you couldn't even reproduce it today with all the high tech and the CAM processes. We couldn't even reproduce it for that amount of money. So to me, this is a no-brainer. Now, not everybody may like vintage. Vintage sometimes is not necessarily water resistant, like a brand new Moon swatch. That is, of course, a complete other way of enjoying entering the watch community. So the relative value proposition that I consider a bargain is by putting it into perspective with what else there is that does something similar. Mm-hmm. If you know how many chronographs from the 60s are powered by the Valjoux 72 example, you will find chronographs for 500,000, most likely with a Rolex and Cosmograph Daytona logo printed on the dial, but you can also find those signed by Universal, by Hoyer, in the very humble 4-digit budgets. Same period, same Valjoux powered caliber, and they really represent superb value to someone who wants that feeling to be a bit of a young Steve McQueen, to be a bit of a young Paul Newman. Yeah. That is I think how I would enter in the vintage arena.
And that makes sense too. If you think about it that way, there's different ways to look at it. You can study the calibers, which caliber makes you happy, or you could look at the dials and you know what sort of dial makes you happy. And I think that's.
You mentioned the dials. I mentioned the calibers. The dials, if you look at the Baylor, Singer, Stern dials, you find them again in so many different brands, meaning the same quality, the same execution, the same machines that built them. And a little bit of studying, exchanging with experienced collectors, you will find treasures where you say, wow, how could nobody else yet chase this? I'm so fortunate.
Right. Now, what about the time, let's say, memorial debate between vintage and modern pieces, and when you start a collection? What are your thoughts on that?
I personally think they go hand in hand. You could have flipped a coin this morning and you could have seen me with a very aged, vintage, mechanical, manual wind, outdated looking watch on my wrist. Sure. Or you could have seen me here with something on a rubber strap that doesn't even have a barrel that needs winding in the morning.
Right.
So these two complete opposite chapters go as well hand in hand as a wonderful art museum that I recently visited in near Basel that I recommend to you and your group of friends, the Baylor Foundation. They hosted an exhibition where they had a Warhol next to a Cézanne, comparing two portraits. They compared a Basquiat with African tribal art. They've compared, why does one need to be one or the other?
Right.
It's relatively easy to give you the pros and cons of each. Certainly, a watch from the 1930s, 40s, 50s will not be as robust as a brand new watch with the brand new rubber gaskets and seals that you can take right into the pool. No doubt about that. It takes also more time to study a vintage watch before buying than a brand new so-called double sealed that the trust is into Patek Philippe or Rolex or Audemars Piguet that delivers to you a factory finished watch. What you don't have with a modern watch is the history. the patina, the provenance, the discovery, the hunt, the unearthing, maybe even the servicing and the repairing by a elder, skilled watchmaker who was already back there active. I think they're complementary. They are probably needed to give each other a raison d'être. They justify each other.
Yes.
Contemporary watches cannot exist if they weren't built on the patrimony, the heritage of the vintage.
Right.
But the vintage, again, benefit from when contemporary brands and blogs write about watchmaking in the first instance. It's a very healthy side-by-side that I don't think should be either or conflictual in any way.
Okay, great. Now, of course, you yourself are one of the most influential, I would say, people in the watch auction world. Maybe you'd like to tell us a little bit about the grails that you've personally found and sourced over the years. I mean, which ones stand out the most and why?
It is a very personal question because I'm sure every watch specialist values their grails differently. Sometimes a grail is associated to a brand, to a period, to a mechanism. And then, of course, sometimes the grail is the connection to the grail word comes from its previous owner, the history, the provenance. So I'm sure you expect me to say the Paul Newman. And you know what? I will say it.
Right.
This watch has probably embodied every aspect that makes watch collecting so fascinating, so emotional, so full of adrenaline. This was a 1.5 year long journey during which I was involved in legal discussions. Not that we had a legal issue with the consignor,
Sure.
but purely just the use of Paul Newman's face
Sure.
is a highly protected asset by Paul Newman's own. So there were financial discussions, there were strategic discussions, timing, location, but then the most beautiful part was being allowed to meet not only the consignor, not only Nell Newman, Paul Newman's daughter,
Right.
girlfriend back then,
Yes.
of James Cox, but through those I met Mario Andretti, a friend, former racing
Racer, yes.
partner of Paul Newman's. So this 1.5 year long journey was so rich of stress, but also emotional, enriching experiences that I cannot not mention this as one of my most beautiful professional experiences ever.
Right.
Needless to say, the thrill of the auction, the result,
It is history now.
the charitable
15
aspect,
million,
the press.
500,000.
It was a 1.5 year long journey and every day was exciting.
Yeah. I mean, how does that even start? Did you just receive a phone call one day and said, I think I know where the Paul Newman is? Is that how it
No,
all started?
it was even more simple than that. I received a phone call. I have the Rolex Paul Newman. And I thought he was saying, I have a Rolex Paul Newman. And yeah, the rest is history.
Unbelievable. And that was directly from the son-in-law who called you himself.
Yes.
Unbelievable. The rest is truly history and very well written about across major media.
But then, if I may be honest, there have been watches that no one would probably even write about. No blog, no newspaper. But there was a personal history with the consignor who told me, sometimes nearly as unusual and hard to believe, like that scene with the Pulp Fiction with the watch where he says, "This is your dad's watch," where I was told stories of wars, stories of homes that burned down, and the only thing that was saved was the watch. Stories of tears, of love, of fights, of drama, of survival, of wars. There's always a story, and not just of a person, their families, their fathers, grandfathers. And when someone comes to you with a $10 or $20 or $30,000 watch, giving you their life story, and you realize to them these are the crown jewels of the family, and you work with them for 6 months, and at the end the watch makes $50,000, and they tell you from the beginning, this is all we have, and you realize that you've helped someone who is not famous, not in the newspaper on the cover, and there is this extra well-being or comfort that you brought to them with your job. This is more rewarding than being on a newspaper cover selling a famous watch. When you do make a difference to people, I say like you and I, people off the street from all types of walks of life.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think to your point about vintage watches, I mean, there's always a story connected to vintage watches.
Always.
And actually with modern watches, if you think about it, you can start your story with the modern watches.
Absolutely.
It's a very interesting dichotomy there. I'm going to ask you another big question, and it's about the state of watch collecting today. What are your thoughts? I mean, what influences watch collecting today, and what watches do you see on the horizon, for example, with those types of influential people or media or whatever it might be?
We live in a literally connected world, meaning that everyone knows what everybody does on the other end of the planet instantly. This means that an executive in one brand sees instantly the launch of his competitors. One collector sees instantly what another collector is buying. One dealer sees what an auction house is offering, who sees what another dealer is offering. We influence each other daily without even realizing. To an extent where our fathers and grandfathers, they lived their life in their town and were much less exposed to that permanent influence from outside. I sincerely believe that the way we dress, what we eat, what we drink, what we watch is always the result of us being recommended. Go and try this, and go and have you seen that handbag, and look at these shoes, and look at that car. It's good and bad. I said early on, we should go on our own journey. But how can we go on our journey when we know what David Beckham wears, what Brad Pitt wears, what the President of the United States wears? It's good to be inspired, but I don't find it that good that we automatically conclude if it's good for somebody there, it's good for me. There's a difference between influence and inspiration. Watches has, as a hobby, exponentially grown since I started 30 plus years ago. Again, it's good in some way, it's not so good in other ways. It is today a worldwide movement, which is wonderful. I like that big community, of course. However, when I see that 50% of the people want as a life goal either a Royal Oak, a Nautilus or a Daytona or a Richard Mille, I'm like, sorry, have you thought outside that box? By the way, all the 4 fabulous watches. I say that so to avoid any misunderstandings. But why not try something new? Like we encourage our children, don't just go for pizza and French fries. That's monotonous. That world is so much more interesting out there than just a handful of great brands. So I wished that watches would be less mainstream, even though I'm happy that watches have a future, that mechanical watches are not obsolete, that the most famous, the most rich, the most beautiful enjoy great handmade haute horlogerie on their wrists, whereas they could have some microchip beeping on their wrist. Right. I just wish there was more intellectual and artistic independence in everyone's mind and being less influenced.
I note you say that with an independent watchmaker on your wrist at this moment. So that's a very fitting statement.
It is an interesting coincidence that I'm wearing this watch today, and for those who think that I'm out of vanity matching my trousers and the strap, it's not the case. That watch was actually not a popular watch when it came out,
Right.
and was not a hard to come by watch. When I bought it, I wrote an article that you can read on Phillips.com, where I wouldn't say in an apologetic way, I've shocked my friends, I've shocked my group of collectors by saying, it's okay to wear a battery-driven watch if it makes you happy, if it gives you comfort, if it gives you that smile when you put it on. Now, maybe today it's become mainstream, not even sure if I'm so happy about it, because I really enjoy wearing it.
Sure.
We've touched on the investment side a little bit before. I wish that everybody would make all their educated decisions without the back thought, how much can I make in 6 months or in a year? You don't pick your friends and what's your balance on your bank account, the most profitable friends.
Yeah.
You look for inner values, qualities, and not just like the superficial financial gain, instant satisfaction.
Yeah, very true, very true. Just to shift gears a little bit, I did want to speak a little bit about, of course, the two auctions. One is the Royal Oak 50th anniversary auction, and the other one is the Geneva watch auction. Let's start with the Royal Oak. Why do you think the Royal Oak specifically is so special that your team created a thematic auction around specifically the Royal Oak?
The Royal Oak has already been mentioned in the 90s and in the noughties, way before its commercial earthquake-type success, way before its 50th anniversary as one of the most iconic wristwatches of all time. Why is it such an icon? I think that when Gerald Genta sat down, he didn't just design a new shape, he didn't just design a new concept, which by the way it is, because I can't think of a watch that was designed from scratch as a one piece of engineering for your wrist,
Yeah.
where steel and luxury and technical raffinesse meet all in one. It's a design language, it's a code. It's a new genre of watch. A little bit like when Andy Warhol or Roy Lichtenstein did art that today we call pop art, but that was no longer as deadly serious as it used to be with the old masters, not as precise, not as, maybe not even the craftsmanship is the same, where just conceptually speaking, it was a complete change of culture. You cannot not celebrate one of the top 10 most important wristwatches of all times,
Right.
as a genre, as a family, as a model. But once we decided we would do it, we said we will do it well. Not just catch as catch can, put in 20, 30 watches,
Sure.
write 3 lines and say, here's your Royal Oaks and move on.
Yeah.
I can tell you that we've really gone way beyond
Okay.
anything we've done before in terms of effort. Effort in our industry still means working hours. Quite amazingly, we've got for each watch a certificate from Audemars Piguet confirming numbers, reference, serial from A to Z. We really went for the unpolished, unrestored, best quality watches. We didn't just go for the easy sellers, just 20 brand new ceramics or tourbillons from 2022. We purposely went and wanted to tell a story. from 1972 all the way to 2022. From the smallest 20 millimeter ladies watch to the largest 45, I believe, millimeters. From the simple with quartz movement to the grand complication with perpetual calendar minute repeating split. So it should also serve as a book to inspire, to consult, to learn about. So we go back to where do you get your information from.
Right.
So it wasn't really a commercial exercise for an auction with an estimate of 5 to 10 million francs, I believe.
Okay.
It would be enough to sell 2 great Dufours and 2 great Journes, and you would be there as well.
Sure.
It was our way to thank Gerald Genta, to thank Audemars Piguet, to have created that watch, to celebrate it, and to bring that happiness to our community the way we've experienced it when putting together the auction.
Right. And would you have specific pieces that you'd want to highlight in this auction?
I'm sure that the super purists, super scholars will find it an earthquake in the Royal Oak sphere that we found. Actually, I should say that it found us. I'm talking about number 2.
Number 2.
The world's second ever made Royal Oak ever. Not just of a reference, ever.
Ever.
A watch that was exhibited in Basel. A watch that was since 1972 with the same owner. A watch that has not seen wear on the wrist since 1972. A watch that is 100% original, unpolished, with its accessories. So it's like you and I taking a time machine, going back to 1972 to the probably smaller than today boot at Audemars Piguet, and look at number 2. This encounter in 2022 is breathtaking. To see that time capsule original 5402 ST. I'm equally enamored myself with watches that we know exist. We know pictures of them, but we've never seen them at auction. For example, one of 20 ever made, reputably 20 ever made, I think the number is actually smaller, 14802P. The massive, heavy, elusive jumbo in platinum. A watch that is royal, should I even say imperial, in its heft, in its weight, with the Tuscan blue, slightly electric blue dial. I am equally fascinated by the grand complications. One in the most humble look in steel with a typical Royal Oak dial. The other one fully encrusted pavé with diamonds. So really heavy-duty party evening watch. I'm also surprised when I see watches that I didn't know they existed. I didn't know that a medium size in white gold with silver gray dial was made. I didn't know that only 2 examples in white gold with the so-called owl dial and the diamond ring on the bezel were made. I didn't know that Chaumet retailed a handful of jumbo Royal Oak and that they had a Chaumet stock number on the back. We learned so much, and I really hope that our learning experience is properly reflected in that catalog.
It's really like a journey in its own. And of course, then you also have the Geneva Watch Auction 15. Which watches would you say would be the highlights of that specific auction?
There's 200 watches in that auction that we split between the Saturday and Sunday session, with estimates anywhere between 2,000 francs, that's today about $2,000, and in excess of $1.5 million. The latter being for the only known yellow gold Daytona with pulsation dial, formerly the property of Eric Clapton, one of the most experienced connoisseur collectors of many collectibles, art, motor cars, watches. In between those extremes, I'm sure to some the Simon Wiesenthal Patek Philippe is a historic, momentous watch. It's a watch that, even if it was Mr. Unknown who owned it originally, it would be goosebumps to anyone with a horological taste for raffinesse, for subtleties, with a black lacquer dial, a steel Patek Philippe, time-only watch, huge Breguet numerals applied, massive contrast between the black and the silver tones. And Simon Wiesenthal, I think really one of the most remarkable men of the 20th century. Someone who endured more pain than hopefully anyone here today with us, but who remained a friend of mankind, who battled not to forget in order not to let anything like the Holocaust repeat itself again. A man who was not out for vengeance, for justice, yes, which is why he became also known as a Nazi hunter. I think this watch is so relevant today in these troubled times with conflicts in our on our planet here in Europe going on, that I think it has a very, very important position, not just in the auction, but to me personally in my heart. In between the top lots and the bottom, you will find independents, you will find sports watches, you will find your beloved Nautilus and Aquanaut, you will find a Newell stock Zenithal Primera, you will find prototypes Omega Speedmasters that I did not know 6 months ago they existed. It's really a menu of what watch collecting should be and can be in 2022.
Fantastic. Sounds very exciting. Looks like we have a lot to look forward to in the 2 upcoming auctions. And I think that brings us to the end of our time, if you would. So Aurel, I'd like to say thank you very much for giving us all these great insights, teaching us about the journey of watch collecting and of course, sharing your in-depth insights in the world of watches. So thank you, Aurel.
I thank you for your interest. It's a privilege to welcome you to Phillips here in Geneva. I hope that you will enjoy the coming days at La Reserve as much as I promised, that it will be fun, a community, to meet as many new faces and collectors in the coming days. And please come back as soon as you can.
Hi, we are here with Virginie Liatar-Rosli. She is a watch specialist at Phillips and head of sales at the Royal Oak 50th auction. And today you're going to show us some of the pieces of the Royal Oak 50th, and we're very excited to see some of these unique pieces.
Yeah.
So shall we go inside?
So here you have a perpetual calendar that is very interesting because it's an open work dial. It's made of tantalum and platinum. It's been made in 25 examples. Out of those 25, 16 were made with the reference that has got an open work dial, and 9 of them have been made with another reference with a plain dial. Here you have another piece in stainless steel, a tourbillon. What is special on this one is also the color of the dial, because most of the time the blue dial were mounted on platinum version. Here it's on a stainless steel one, and this one is number 1.
Unbelievable.
So made for the 25th anniversary of the Royal Oak, and that's the first example.
Beautiful, beautiful.
The Royal Oak evolved with a lot of complication, but it also evolved a lot in sizes. So here you have emerald cut emerald.
Right.
You have diamond, also with an emerald cut shape. And here it's a 26 millimeter. AP also made this type of piece with hard stone dial.
Yes.
And this one is made with a jasper dial,
Right.
which is absolutely sublime. You have that green with those little red specks inside. And that's really a very, very impressive piece.
Yeah.
And only 5 are known. Here you have another perpetual calendar in yellow gold, all set with diamond. This piece has been made only in 3 examples, and this one is number 3. For the last piece of the auction, lot 88, is a very special piece. It's what we believe was the Karl Lagerfeld personal watch. This watch is a 5402 A series that has been blackened after market because Karl Lagerfeld was known to only wear 2 colors,
Yes.
white and black. And Karl Lagerfeld was one of the first celebrity to recognize the art in the real oak and to spot the importance of that watch.
So today we're with Tiffany Toe, head of sales at Geneva, and we are going to learn a little bit more about some of the pieces that are going to be available at the Geneva 15. Yeah, I think we're going to look at 3 or 4 watches, or 4 or 5.
Exactly. So I think we'll look at 3 watches, and I think
Okay.
each at a different price point,
Cool.
and each with a different bit of history as well. So
All
we'll give the
right.
viewers something a bit different to look at.
Would be awesome. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's take a
Let's
look.
start. The first one I'd like to speak about is lot 144.
Okay.
It's Messina Lab Habring collaboration.
Okay.
It was the first collaboration that Messina Lab did with Habring, but you have all these elements that the horological nerds like us love.
Right.
You have the deadbeat seconds, which was a movement that Habring himself developed for this model. You have the beautiful gilt dial, which kind of reminds you of the vintage timepieces, whether it's a 96 Patek, but it has a vintage appearance and has a bronze case as well. This is a 3448 white gold.
Beautiful.
It's a very important model because it's a milestone. They went from the manual movement to something that's automatic. So white gold is already really rare for 3448s. But to find one with a luminous dial is like unheard of. Sure, so this is the heavy duty watch out of our selection. It's a 5980 and it's set with baguettes and brilliant diamonds.
Yep.
We know that Nautilus is kind of de rigueur. Every watch collector wants a Nautilus because
That's
it's
right.
the sports watch, it's important in Patek Philippe's history. But I think there are also different levels of collecting Nautilus. You have the stainless steel one, which is great. Everybody wants one. But then you have the off-catalog watches.
Right.
And this is one of them.